This is gonna work. Hang on a second. All right. So here we are in Minnesota in a snowstorm on a Saturday morning. I'm Bill Collins, Interstate Truck Driving School. We're talking today about getting you ready for your road test. Good morning. So the way I like to start any Saturday off is, first off, any questions? No questions. What I'm going to do, if anybody at home has any questions, I would invite you to text them to me at this phone number, and then I'll be able to respond to questions via text. So anybody at home that's watching, sitting there in your sweatshirt and slippers, go ahead and give me a text question via that number, and I will get back to you, okay? Let me do this. Let me show the ABBC video real quick once. And then let's talk about that.
ABBC, 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 A, air, B, buzzer, B, brakes, C, check brakes, A, air, B, buzzer, B, brakes, C, check brakes.
We're here talking about part of your air brake inspection test that is a part of your CDL road test in order to obtain a CDL driver's license. Now, when you're doing your inspection, you are going to go over a whole host of items on this checklist that we discussed in our air brake class, and we have a video specific to that. But what we're doing here in this little segment is we're talking about what's called the air brake check. Now, the air brake check is at the very bottom right of your CDL pre-trip inspection test checklist. And every other component on this checklist is identified specifically, component by component by component. But there's a difference here with this air brake check, because they list air brake check without telling you exactly what it is that you're supposed to check. And what you need to do is you need to memorize 4 things that need to be checked as a part of this air brake check process. All right, now the workbook that we give you when you take our air brake class lists all of the components in the body of the checklist. It identifies the component by name with a picture and gives you the narrative, the verbal narrative that you're supposed to repeat to the examiner. Now the air brake check, we have a special section on that in the very back of our workbook. And as you'll see, we break this into an ABBC process. There are 4 steps to this air brake check. And again, you have to memorize these 4 steps. And that's why we're taking a little bit of extra time to point these 4 steps out. The first A in the ABBC process is checking for air loss. The first B is to check for the warning signal buzzer, which comes on when you run your air pressure down between 60 and 80 pounds. The second B is to get the emergency brakes to come on, and then last but not least, you need to check those emergency brakes. All right?
Air brake check, air brake check, ABBC, ABBC, A, air, B, buzzer, B, brakes, C, check brakes, A, air, B,
in our PowerPoint at the back of your workbook, we break each of these 4 steps down to give you a little bit more information. The air loss check is done for 1 minute with your foot on the brake. The motor must be off. With several of our trucks, the ignition key should be on, even though the motor's not running. And for 1 minute, you're going to hold your foot on the brake pedal to see if it loses any air pressure. So you're going to be watching the air gauge to identify any loss of air pressure. You will need to tell the examiner that if you're driving a Class A vehicle, you cannot lose more than 4 pounds of pressure. If you're in a Class B vehicle, not more than 3 pounds of pressure. So that's the A of air loss check in the ABBC process. The next item that you need to do is get the buzzer to come on. That's the B in the ABBC process. The buzzer identifies the low air warning signal. When you deplete your air pressure underneath 80 pounds of pressure, somewhere between 60 and 80 pounds of pressure, that warning light and buzzer must come on. So with the key on, you are going to pump the brake pedal to get that buzzer to come on. All right? When it comes on, simply point at the light on the dashboard and tell the examiner, yes, the warning signal is working properly. Remember, you must have the key on in order for that to work. That's the largest single mistake that people make in this process is they forget to turn the key on. Now there's a second B, to be or not to be, that is the question. There's a second B to this ABBC process, and that is to get the emergency brakes to come on. The emergency brakes will come on when you deplete your air pressure down between 20 and 40 psi. So what you do is you pump the brake pedal aggressively again, wait for the buttons to pop out for the dashboard. If you're driving a Class B truck, there'll be a single button, the yellow. If you're driving a Class A truck, there will be 2 buttons, yellow for the truck, red for the trailer. They both must pop out. Then the C. So A, B, B, C. The C is check the emergency brakes. You do that by starting the truck up, putting it in gear, and making a gentle attempt at moving the truck forward with the emergency brake set. That proves the emergency brakes work. After that, you'll need to build up your air pressure before you go on. You Class A drivers, remember you need to do a trailer tug before you pull away from the curb. So what you're going to want to do is study your workbook, go over this checklist, come in and practice this process. We're here every Wednesday, every Saturday, with the exception of holiday weekends. We've got these videos that you can watch to help you prepare for this. We want you to pass the first time. You want to pass the first time. So put the effort into preparing for this. You've got to memorize this air brake check process. So put the effort into preparing for it, and then you're going to do really well. Thanks for watching. I'm Bill Collins, Interstate Truck Driving School. Have a good day, but more importantly, have a safe day.
Air, brake check, air, brake check, air, brake check, air, brake check, ABBC, 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 A, air, B, buzzer, B, brakes, C, check brakes, A, air, B, buzzer, B, brakes, C, check brakes.
Okay, so I found my phone here. So again, anybody that has any questions, text them to 651-707-4672, and I'll be able to respond. So let's go here. Someplace here it should tell me if anybody's watching. I don't know where I'm supposed to find that, but whatever. So, don't know if anybody's out there or not. All right, so any questions about that?
And obviously, you want to do it for the most part in order, but if you forget, you can come back and do it, not get dot.
And that's really important to understand, okay? This process is confusing, and you can screw it up. Be confident in knowing that you can mess up this air brake check process as long as you recognize what you've done and figure out how to correct it yourself. You lose no points. You lose no points. We've had students tell us that they were doing it, they messed it up, told the examiner, oh, criminy, I messed this up, I got to do it again. And the examiner will say, well, just explain it to me. And they explain what they did wrong and how they're supposed to do it, and they say, you're good. Now, I can't promise you the examiner's going to do that, and I can't promise you that with Wisconsin, but it wouldn't surprise me if that happened in Wisconsin, okay? And so anything that you do, and I've said this before, so let me say it again, if you make a mistake on any part of this testing process, own up to it, acknowledge it, admit it, tell the guy that you realize you made a mistake. And I'm certain that you're better off doing that than hoping he didn't see it. Right? I did get a report of someone this week taking the test. They're pulling over to park next to the curb, and the examiner made a comment of, come on, you're running out of room, you got to park. And so the guy parks, and then the examiner takes points off for being too far away from the curb. Now, you don't have to park next to the curb on the hill on your test.
Okay.
You do have to pull over and put your four-way flashers on at some point.
Now, when they, when you know, you pull over next to the curb, are they also looking for how you're going to put your steering wheel, your front tires?
No.
Okay.
Not unless you're parked on a hill, which you Minnesota drivers have to do.
Right.
But in Wisconsin, you don't do a hill park. You pull over and put your
Right.
flashers on.
All right.
So they want to see that you can safely pull over and park the truck, but you don't park on a hill. You guys in Minnesota are going to park on a hill. Now, this examiner that took points off being too far away from the curb, he wouldn't have taken points off on me, because I'm going to make sure I'm within 12 inches of the curb when I park. That's a statute. And you need to understand, if you're 14 inches away from the curb and somebody comes along and runs into you and gets killed, you're going to get sued. Even if the guy's drunk, you're going to get sued. So if it's a rule, it's a rule. You got to follow it. All right, so I'm going to pay attention to my mirrors, and I'm going to get this thing lined up within the 12 inches of the curb. I'm going to get it straight and parallel with the curb. And that takes a distance to do that. Now, if an examiner says to me, come on, you're running out of room, I'd stop the truck, I'd look him in the eye and go, okay, look, I need more room to get this thing within 12 inches of the curb per statute. What are you telling me to do here? See, that examiner shouldn't have said anything. That examiner should have kept his damn mouth shut and let this person finish. And if they run out of room, they run out of room. I mean, part of the problem is where they have people do this, there is a limited amount of room, so they shouldn't be doing it there. Okay? They've set up this test to make it unrealistically difficult. And I wouldn't put up with that. I'd stop the truck, look the guy in the eye and go, okay, wait a second here now. And remember now, you're on videotape in our trucks. And I'd say to him, look, If you want me to stop here, that's fine, but I ain't close enough to the curb yet. I need more room to get close enough to the curb. Now, if you don't want to take any points off for where I'm at, fine, I'll stop here. But otherwise, if you're going to judge how far away from the curb, I need to move further up. What would you like me to do? I mean, it's just so frustrating that these examiners are dinking around with stuff like that, okay? But that goes into part of what I'm doing when I am driving, taking a test. I'm going to narrate for the examiner. I'm going to tell him what I'm doing. Before he tells me I'm running out of room, I'm going to be saying, well, I need to go a little further here to get lined up. So I'm going to be proactive on this thing. I'm talking my way through this test. And Cody, do that in Wisconsin too. Okay? Tell the examiner what you're doing. Your mission here is to pass a test. To do that, you got to convince the dude sitting next to you that you have an idea what the bleep you're doing. So tell him what you're doing. Right? And for some of us, because of our personalities, that's not the easiest thing in the world to do. But if you can figure out a way to do that, I think it's to your advantage. Okay. Another thing that came up this past week on tests. Remember, I'm telling you not to get underneath the vehicle. However, you will need to get down on all fours. Just bending over doesn't cut it. And anything that you can see from all four on the ground is legitimate. It's fair game. If you can see it, it's fair game. But getting down on the ground is something that they would expect you to do. And if you don't do it, you may very well lose points for not pointing out something that you could have seen had you gotten down on all fours. Now, there's some confusion with these suspension components in the back of the trucks and trailers, okay? Let's do this. So there's a diagram of rear leaf springs. There's another diagram of rear leaf springs. Here we go. Let's look at this for a second. There's a airbag rear suspension. Now, some of our trucks and trailers have airbag suspensions on them. Some don't. The airbag suspension is going to have upper and lower mounting components, and then it's also going to have to mount to the axle somehow. Here's an example of leaf springs and a torque arm or control arm. And anything that you can see underneath this truck is fair game. Let's take a little bigger look at that's what I want to do there. What the heck? Why is this not working? clipboard thing is not working here. So let's try it this way. Okay. So, can you see where the spring is? Spring is right there. So this part right here, that's the spring. And then this piece right here, you could call it a control arm or a torque arm. And do you see how it mounts to a frame bracket with a bolt right there? So that's fair game. If you can see something like that, you got to point it out. Anything that you can see underneath that truck or trailer, you have to point it out and tell them that you're checking it to make sure it's securely attached, none of the bolts are loose or missing, that kind of stuff, okay? So now, what is this right here? Maybe I didn't do it clear enough. Here's another one right here, this thing right here. That's the U-bolt. Now, do you see how little of that U-bolt you can see? But that's what that is. That's the U-bolt. Now, you've got an axle on the back of this truck, and you got an axle on the front, you got an axle on the back, and you got an axle on the trailer, right? You got axles. And they always mount with some sort of U-bolt. So whether it's a torsion arm, torque arm, spring, or airbag system, somehow or another this suspension component must mount to the axle. And since the axle is a round tube going across, right, then the way to attach that is with some sort of U-bolt. Now this is going to change one truck to another. And that's part of my intent as the owner of this school is that I don't want to have cloned equipment so that the only thing you see is one version of a mechanical component. I want you to be able to have the experience of looking at different configurations so that you can recognize this stuff. Now again, the premise of the pre-trip inspection test is, in order for you to be a licensed truck driver, they want you to be able to walk up to a truck you've never driven before or a trailer you've never pulled before. This truck has been sitting for 6 weeks or 6 months or whatever, and the feds are saying you should be able to figure out if it's safe to drive or not. Now, I think that's a little bit of a stretch of what is necessary, but that's the premise. Because on a daily basis, you're not going to be crawling underneath to look at this stuff. There's just no need to do this on a daily basis. But if you've never driven the truck before, how would you know if it's safe? See? So that's the premise of the testing process. So keep that in mind, that this is more involved than what we do on a daily basis, especially if you're using the same truck, same trailer all the time. You know, if I go hook up to a trailer and it's 6 months old and it's still all shiny and bright, how much time am I going to spend inspecting it? Not much. I'm telling you, I'm not going to spend much time inspecting a brand new piece of equipment. Now it's 25 years old and been sitting in a farmer's field. You can figure on it being defective. So there's everything in between that. So everything underneath this truck or trailer is fair game for you to be able to identify. Now here's some good news. You don't necessarily need to know the exact names for these things. Alright? You can use the words like whatchamacallit, doohickey, thingamajig, doodad. But you got to point to them and give them an explanation of what potential problems you're looking for. And when it comes to suspension components, it's looser, broken mounting bolts. Or mounting brackets. All right. Now again, your air ride suspension. This is your airbag. Okay. And you have to identify two things if you've got air ride suspension. The airbag is not damaged or leaking. And then the mounts. So there's the top mount, this is the bottom mount for the airbag. And you can see how it bolts into something. Right? And this bolts in on top. There you go. So if the nuts and bolts that are holding this thing are loose, well, that's a problem, correct?
Correct.
Now, how often is there a problem with the mounting? Very rare. You'd have to have an old piece of junk trailer. Good morning. For that to be an issue and be a problem. What is a common problem with air ride suspension is a leaking airbag. So that does happen with some frequency. They do last a good long time. They probably last a good 10, 12 years. So it's not like they wear out real quick. And I guess it depends on the conditions that you use it in and how much weight you're putting on it and that kind of stuff. So this is pretty simple. Where it gets a little confusing is whether you're talking about a spring or a torque arm or a control arm and how well can you see it. The difference between a spring and a torque arm so you've got your axle in the middle that is circular. It's a tube, okay? You've got U-bolts attaching whatever it is you're attaching to it, going like that. Okay? And now if it's a spring, let me do this. If it's a spring, it goes all the way across like that, and it mounts in two places. So there'd be a bracket here and a bracket here, and your U-bolts are mounting it right here. So this is mounted there, and then you've got a bolt there and a bolt there, bolt there, bolt there. There's a spring. Okay? If you've got a torque arm, that would be a torque arm mounted to the frame here. So bolt there, and then your two U-bolts here. So I'm going to call that a torque arm. So the difference between the spring and the torque arm, spring there, torque arm there, the reason for the way you identify the difference is a torque arm mounts in two places, at the U-bolts and at the bracket, whereas a spring mounts in three places, to the frame twice and then the U-bolts to the axle. So that's the difference between a torque arm and a spring. I've had a student or two where there were torque arms on the trailer or truck, and the examiner looked at it and thought it was a spring. Well, just going to check on something here. I think what I was doing would be dangerous. So this truck or trailer had a torque arm, but it looked like a spring, and the examiner called it a spring and said that the student was wrong because they should have called it a spring. Well, actually, it was a torque arm. So part of what I'm concerned about is you don't need to know what to call it. What you need to do is, there's one of my suspension components, and you could get away with it by saying spring, torque arm, whatever you want to call that. But I'm gonna check that to make sure it's securely attached. I'm gonna check, make sure none of the bolts are loose or missing, make sure none of the brackets are bent or cracked, that it's structurally sound. I mean, that's the whole idea with the suspension components, is that they're intact. Okay? And then our third option is going to be the airbag suspension. So when you've got an airbag suspension, the way that typically works is the airbag is over here. And so it's going to mount at the top and then to that arm. But there'll still be, in that case, U-bolts mounting the airbag arm to it. Okay? Now, you could have any combination of these three things. You could have just springs, just a torque arm, just airbags. You could have airbag and torque arm. You could have airbag and spring. You could have spring and torque arm, spring and bag. Any one of those three combinations. All right.
Point all three of those out.
Well, whatever's on that truck or trailer is what you're going to point out. And now the guys that are doing Class B, it's a little simpler because I only have one Class B truck and there's no trailer, right? But those of you that are here today are all Class A, right? Is anybody doing Class B? You all doing Class A? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So there are some variances in our trucks and trailers in terms of these suspension components. And again, I feel it's appropriate that I should expose you to a variety of these things, not just one. So, you know, sometimes people will complain to me, well, why do you have so many trucks? So many different things. Because I think you need to be able to do that. If you're going to be a competent truck driver, you got to be able to recognize this stuff. Agree?
Agreed.
Okay? So I want variety here. That's intentional. I don't want a clone system where everybody's doing the exact same thing. And then you don't know what you're doing out there in the real world. Right? So part of the advantage of being here on Wednesdays and Saturdays is all of these trucks and trailers are here. So you can go out and crawl around these vehicles. I don't want you underneath them. But remember that my staff are here to answer these questions. And Mark, who's here today, here every Wednesday, Mark is very knowledgeable when it comes to this stuff. He used to inspect these things for the highway patrol. So he had to be trained in not only what they all were, but what was acceptable and what's not acceptable. So don't hesitate to ask those questions. Make sense? I want you to get to a level where you're confident that you can point out everything on this checklist with confidence, that you know exactly what you're talking about. Let's get the checklist open up here. Now, the other day I went over the connection components with everybody on Thursday. Was everybody that's here today here on Thursday? Is there any question about the air and electrical lines? Any question about the mounting bolts for the fifth wheel? Platform. How big is the platform? It could literally be this tall, okay? It could literally be this tall. It's just a little bitty bump from the frame rails. Just holds the pin for the fifth wheel, okay? So there's not much to that platform at all. All it does is support that pin. And again, the mounting bolts and the platform and the pin itself, why don't they have you check the pin? You'd think, actually, that would be the thing that would wear out before the platform would fail. The pin would wear out. I've never seen one wear out, but why don't they have us check the pin? I don't know. But platform is on the list, so you're going to point out the platform. Okay? Whatever's on the list is what you point out. Locking jaws, remember you can't see the locking jaws unless you go underneath the vehicle. Don't go underneath the vehicle. Take your stick and point underneath the vehicle. Tell them that's how it's done. But then when you're talking about locking jaws, I would use this motion. I would say, I'm checking to make sure the jaws are locked on that kingpin thingy, do that. Okay? The release arm, you're going to be able to see the release arm. Some of them have a safety catch, a little bitty hook thing. If it's there, you'll see it. If it ain't there, it ain't there. Okay? Telling it's all the way in. It's in the secured position. Those of you here the other day, I showed you that. Excuse me, fifth wheel skid plate. That's the top of the fifth wheel. That's the part that the trailer is resting on. They want you to tell them that with the trailer detached, you'd check that, make sure it's not cracked, damaged, bent, and properly lubricated. Now, I've never seen a cracked, bent, or damaged fifth wheel skid plate. I've never seen it. 40-some years driving truck, I ain't never seen one of those. But properly lubricated, yes, we have to properly lubricate them. Now, how often do you lubricate a fifth wheel? It depends upon how you use it. There was a time, one of the jobs I had, I don't talk about it much because I didn't do it very long and it wasn't a very exciting job, but I hauled trailers off the rail yards over in St. Paul. So, you know, the chassis and containers that go on trains, okay? And so the rail yard, these trailers and chassis would come off the trains and they'd drop them in the yard there, and they wanted the company that was hauling them to get them out of there right away. So there were times where that was my assignment. And what I would do is I'd go back and forth between a drop yard and the rail yard, drop yard and the rail yard, shagging trailers back and forth all day long. And I would hook up to about 60, 70 trailers a day. Now every time you go underneath a trailer with another, you know, go underneath the trailer with your truck, you're taking your the grease off your fifth wheel and dispersing it onto the trailer, right? And so I would literally grease my fifth wheel twice a day when I was doing that, morning and lunch. The opposite of that would be a husband and wife team that runs a refrigerated trailer around the country. Those two will never grease their fifth wheel. And the reason is they put a ton of miles on their truck, 5,000, 6,000, maybe even 7,000 miles a week, which means once a month they take it in for service. When they take it in for service, they do drop the trailer in the yard. The mechanic takes the tractor, puts it in the shop to do the service, the oil change and everything. And the mechanic will grease the fifth wheel for them. And then when it gets hooked back up, you're good until the next month. So that couple will never grease their fifth wheel. A guy that works sand and gravel, let's say you're pulling an end dump, side dump, something like that, I would, on once a week, I'd do preventative maintenance on that thing. I'd grease, you know, the vehicle, and I'd do preventative maintenance once a week, and one of the things I'd do is I'd grease the fifth wheel. In that kind of a situation, once a month, I'd probably power wash the fifth wheel to get the abrasive sand and gravel off of there. Because working in a gravel pit, you're going to get those abrasives in there. And even though you greased it, you're still wearing stuff out. So once a week I would do that. In the wintertime, I rent a diesel-fired power washer probably half a dozen times during the winter months. In the summer months, we have a regular power washer that we use that doesn't have the heat to it. I try and stay on top of that. You know, now the snowstorm that we're getting today and the sloppy weather we're going to get the next few days, you have to wash dang trucks again. But it's a maintenance thing along with an appearance thing. It's really beneficial maintenance-wise to keep your trucks cleaned off. Sliding fifth wheel pins, the other thing that's on that part of the checklist. Remember, most of our trucks don't have sliding fifth wheels. Some do, very few. Only one of our trucks has the sliding fifth wheel. Let's see if we can find a YouTube video of a sliding fifth wheel.
Everyone, welcome to my channel. It's me, the truck driver guy, and today, guys, I will show you how to fix.
Let's try another one.
Okay, so here's my weight gauge, right? It's saying I'm under 34,000 pounds, but
Now, you can, what this guy's talking about is you can get gauges to hook up to your air ride suspension that tells you how much weight you've got on your axles. They're not dead on accurate, they're good indicators though. But that's what this guy is using to indicate that he needs to slide his axle here.
on my steers, with the picture you're going to see, I am over 34,000. So what I'm going to do right now is we're going to slide the fifth wheel. Here's where my fifth wheel is at. Right here. See the little knots?
All right, so see all those notches? That's a sliding fifth wheel. It's got pins that come in and then go back out to secure it and into those notches. So what he's going to do is release the pins, and then he's going to be able to slide the fifth wheel into a different position, then reset the pins.
Let's see if we get some focus going on. There we go. See the knots? So it's 1, 2 is the third hole right there. We need to go back 2. 1, 2. So each notch is about 400 to 500 pounds a notch, right?
What?
So I'm gonna put up pictures of what my weight were and what they're gonna be now. So I'm at 1, 2. I'm in the third hole. I need to go 3. I need to be in the fourth hole. Back here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I need to be in the fifth hole. Now, I currently got a new trailer. That's why I'm having issues, because of the new trailer. So the first thing you want to do when you let it down, when you want to slide the fifth wheel, is let your landing gear down. Alright? Here we go. So now, I'm used to this because swivel landing gear is on this side. So what you're going to do, you're going to let the landing gear down, right? Because I'm loaded with 45,000 pounds of water. So we're going to go ahead and let that down. I'm going to pause the video. Okay. Landing gear is down, right? Alright, after you let the landing gear down, what you're going to do is you're going to go into your truck. You're going to let the air out of your suspension. Okay? What you're doing is getting all of the pressure off the kingpin and the fifth wheel. So you're going to see what I'm talking about here in just a moment. Okay. Back in my truck. My shit's a mess. Alright, we're going to turn you all around. So, right now, focus. This is where you enter axle when you spit it out. Go let the air out the suspension. Keep an eye on my gauge. Let it out. All that pressure is coming off the back of the kingpin. Trailer is going to be rested firmly on the landing gear, right? See that? See that? Boom. The air is still coming out. Alright. Now I'm about to go ahead and hit the latch real quick. Just hit the latch. Lock the fifth wheel in place. Let's see what we got. Boom! There it is. Focus. So now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're in the fifth hole right now, okay?
So what I was hoping is that
So what you want to do next?
he was going to actually show us how the thing moves. I don't know if I agree with all of the letting the landing gear down and letting the suspension down. I see the logic to it, but see if I can find a shot of them actually moving this thing. So again, you see all those notches? Here we go. I think this will be what, there's what I'm looking for. See how he's moving where the fifth wheel is. Okay, so that's a sliding fifth wheel. Those are the sliding fifth wheel pins. Again, most of the test trucks we have don't have those, but one of them does. So those are the notches that allow you to reposition the fifth wheel and the pins go into those notches to secure it. Okay?
So, and when you slide the fifth wheel, will it help for the weight or?
Yes. What it does is it changes the weight distribution. Okay? So,
You don't want all the weight on the tongue of the truck.
well, you've got limits as to how much weight you can have where, right? So there's a limit to how much weight you can have on these axles. There's a limit to how much you can have here and a limit to how much you can have there. So if you're heavily loaded, you may very well have to reposition the fifth wheel to get it properly, the weight properly distributed. You may also have to move the axles. Now, this type of trailer, your axles don't move, but an open, this type of trailer, these axles are typically adjustable. Okay, we call them sliding tandems. And that's another thing that when you look at your checklist here, on the trailer part of it, right here, when it says tandem release right there, you don't have a tandem release. None of our trucks or trailers I should say, that you use for the testing have tandem releases. So when you get to tandem release, you tell the examiner, I don't have a tandem release. All right? Put my trucks all back together here. Let's look at a couple other things since we're on that subject.
So, do you figure out which axle you need to move your sledding thing, or the weigh station can tell you?
No, you have to figure that out. That's your responsibility, and we'll cover that in the cargo class this coming Friday.
Okay.
So if you haven't had that class, you want to, because we talk about that, about what we're trying to do and how we do it, and okay. Okay, so we have no tandem release on the trailer, okay? On the side of the trailer, there are no lifts. There are trailers that have lift gates of sort on the side. No, hey Rick.
How's it going?
Good.
About 15 minutes or so?
Not even that. Let me put on a video real quick here.
Okay.
Ties would pertain to a flatbed trailer and you've got something tied down. So you don't have that. Now, one of our trailers does have a door on the side. If you have a door on the side, you'd have to show the examiner what that looks like. Okay? On the back of the trailer, none of our trailers have a lift. So that, forget that. No lifts on the back.
So when you take the test, just tell them we don't have the lift, or just you have to still re-explain.
Well, see, you're dealing with this inspection checklist, right?
Yeah.
So as you go down the checklist, you have to be able to identify anything on the checklist that you don't have on the truck.
Okay.
So if it's on the list but not on the truck, you got to tell them, I don't have that.
There's no further explain.
Right. Just that. I don't have that. Okay? What?
Like a prime example would be if you're using manual transmission, you're not going to have automatic transmission fluid.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Okay?
The door only, we have only two doors, the track, right?
Well, I don't know which truck you've got.
The one we go with the example.
Well, we'll have to look at it.
Okay.
I've got different trucks and trailers. Some of the trailers have doors on the side and some don't.
You have a flatbed too, don't you?
Yep. And we typically use the flatbed in Wisconsin. Okay?
What if you have a toolbox on the side of the flatbed or?
Not on the list. That's not on the
Door
list.
has a door.
That's not what they're talking about.
Yeah.
A good thought, but that's not what they're talking about. All right, I gotta run and take care of something real quick here. Just take me a few minutes. I can put a little video on for a couple minutes here. Hi, I'm Bill Collins, Interstate Truck Driving School. The video that you're about to watch is going to walk you through the Minnesota CDL pre-trip inspection checklist. Now, those of you that are taking a test in Wisconsin, it's very similar, although there is a different checklist for Wisconsin, and one of my staff will provide you that checklist. You're also going to work with an instructor that will prepare you specifically for the Wisconsin test. Now, those of you taking a Minnesota CDL road test, you have to do an inspection test before you actually drive the truck. When you do this inspection test, you're going to use a checklist. Now, we're providing you with the checklist right as it comes from the state of Minnesota. This is on the website. It's in the Minnesota CDL manual. And the workbook that we're giving you today is going to walk you through every single item on the checklist and explain to you what it is that you're going to tell the examiner the day of your test. The way this will work, you can use this checklist as a study guide and to help you prepare for the test. But on the day of the test, the examiner is going to take away any checklist that you have, and they're going to give you a new one. This checklist that they're going to give you is going to identify which of the components that you have to do that day. Now, those of you that are doing a Class B test, there's actually 3 components on the checklist that you're going to have to do. The front of the vehicle, the driver fuel area, the rear of the vehicle in essence, and then the inside the vehicle inspection. So 3 components for Class B. Class A will be 6 components. There's a tractor and trailer component up here for semi-trailers, the front of the vehicle, the rear of the vehicle, and then this is the trailer. And then add the inside of the vehicle for the 6th component. Now, of these 6 components, on the day of your test, the examiner is going to come out to you. He's going to hand you a checklist, and he's going to say, okay, you need to do this one, this one, this one, and this one. They will probably leave one of these components off the table. So you're not going to have to do everything on the checklist. They'll tell you which components you don't have to do. Thing is, though, you're not going to know ahead of time, so you need to be prepared to identify each item on the checklist and tell the examiner what the manual tells you that you should check on each of those items. Now, one of the things that's going on right now is that this is a generic checklist. There are things on here that aren't on any of our trucks. As an example, all of our trucks have drum brakes. The checklist down here is going to ask you about drums and linings, which would be drum brakes, or rotor and disc, which would be disc brakes. So you have to identify to the examiner which components are not on the truck. When you get down to brake, drum and lining, you give the explanation for drum and lining and then tell them no disc brakes on this truck. A little further above, we have air compressor next to that master cylinder. There's no master cylinder on these trucks. They are strictly air brakes. So you give an explanation as to what to check on the air compressor and then tell the examiner there is no master cylinder. A couple of things that we don't have on our trucks, there's no lift gates. So at the rear of the vehicle, when they talk about doors and lifts, there's no lift gate. On the trailer, they're going to ask one of the things on the checklist here is frame and tandem release. That pertains to sliding rear axles, where the axle sliding system is released. So we do not have sliding axles on the trailer, so there's not going to be any release. Okay. And then the other thing that could come up, spacers and bud spacers on the wheels. Most of our trucks do not have any spacers on the rear wheels. Most of our trailers don't have spacers. 1 or 2 of them do. Your instructor that day will let you know if the truck or trailer you're using has any spacers that therefore should be mentioned on your test. So we'll make sure that we let you know anything that's unique about the truck and trailer that you're using. But again, you're going to have to identify the things on the checklist that are not going to be on the truck that you're testing in. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to walk you through this whole process and explain to you what you need to do this checklist. This video that you're about to watch is available to you anytime that our office hours are open. We do not make copies of this video and allow people to take it home. We're very protective of it. It's proprietary information, but you're more than welcome to watch this video as many times as you want here in our office. So here we go with the inspection. Ready? So the first thing I would suggest you do as you approach a vehicle, you see down at the bottom of this checklist, it talks about all commercial vehicles must display a current inspection sticker to receive a road test. Well, that inspection sticker is right here on the tractor. Okay, so any truck, the inspection sticker is going to be on the bottom driver's side of the windshield. On the trailer, the inspection sticker is going to be on the front of the bulkhead, could be in the front or the side here, but you're going to check that to make sure that that's current. The examiner is going to do that also, but you should check that as a part of your pre-trip inspection. The other couple of things I do before you really begin, make sure that you got valid license plates on it. And incidentally, if you use this truck, that is a folding hinge there. Sometimes the license plate will have been folded up due to wind on the freeway, so make sure that that's visible. And then while you're at the front of the truck, I'd also take a look underneath for any sort of fluids leaking underneath it before you really start your inspection. Okay? Now what I'm going to do here on the inspection is I'm going to start with the front of the vehicle, and we got lights and reflectors. Now what that means is that you are going to go in and open up, or excuse me, turn on your lights and put on your four-way flashers. Okay? So you come up front here and you literally go look to make sure both your lights are working and the signals, the four-way flashers are working. Go back to the cab and hit the four-way flashers. Okay? Excuse me, the high beams. And then we can check left and right signal here. All right? So left signal's working, high beam, okay? I'll go back to low beam, and so you're going to have to walk around and do this, okay? And now we're going to check the right turn signal. I'm back to low beam, so I'm still good low, right signal works, okay? Now, as far as the reflectors go, this is the reflector on the side of the front of the vehicle, okay? So I've got that reflector in place, and then come around here and check my right reflector. So both of my reflectors on the front of the tractor are in place, okay? So now having done that, I'm going to check that off. And now I've got mirrors. Now I've got fender mirror here, and I've got a convex mirror here, and my West Coast mirror on the passenger side. Everything's tight, in place, secure. Nothing's loose, okay? So that's all good. Go over to the driver's side. Again, West Coast mirror, spot mirror, fender mirror. Now, the important thing here is that all of these mirrors have to be in good serviceable condition. No matter how many mirrors you have in the truck, no mirrors can be broken. So make sure that everything's secure and nothing's broken. All right, I'm going to turn off my four-way flashers here and headlights. Alright, now the next thing on my list is my engine compartment section. So what I got to do now is I've got to open up my engine compartment. So hang on a second, I'll get this opened here. Alright, so when you open a hood, please don't grab the grill. These grills are plastic. You can see by the top of the grill what happens when a person grabs the plastic. So I use the handheld there. Alright. Now, the first thing on my checklist here is my oil level. On this truck, the oil dipstick is right here. And what you need to explain, you don't have to actually check the dipstick, but you tell the examiner that you're going to pull it out, wipe it off to clean it, and then stick it back in there, pull it back out to check the oil level. Now, the reason we don't want you really doing this during the inspection is the motor's hot. We don't want you burning yourself, so you're just going to explain that. So your finger needs to get right into the dipstick, and then you need to, again, verbally explain, I'm going to pull the dipstick out, wipe it off, reinsert it, pull it back out, and read the oil level, okay? Coolant level. Now, coolant level on this truck is over here on this other side. This is a metal expansion chamber on this truck. So the way you check the coolant level on a metal expansion chamber is this little sight glass right here. And as you can see the pinkish, orangish tone of the coolant. So that tells me that this vehicle is at the proper level. Now some of the expansion chambers are plastic, and you can see the plastic reservoir. You can see the coolant through the plastic to determine the proper level. All right, now when it comes to showing the examiner the coolant level, some of our trucks have a plastic expansion chamber. The one I showed you a minute ago had a metal expansion chamber with sight glass. This one's plastic, and so you can see the level in it without any special sight glass. So this is really easy to check coolant here. I'm going to go back over to the other side and check my power steering fluid. Now with this truck, the power steering fluid is checked with a dipstick. So again, you would describe this the same way as you would with as the oil level. You would pull this out. A little dirty here, but this has a dipstick. Okay, so you would pull the dipstick out, wipe it off, reinsert it, pull it back out to read it. So you're not going to do that again because this is hot. We don't want you getting dirty. We don't want you getting burned. So you're not going to do that. You're simply going to point to where the dipstick is and explain that that's the process. Now we just showed you a metal power steering reservoir that required that you check with a dipstick. Well, this one's plastic, and so you can see the fluid level in the plastic reservoir. So you do not need to use, you do not need to check it with a dipstick since you can see it through the plastic reservoir. These plastic reservoirs are real easy in that regard to check. They're not real reliable. They crack and break, and then they're kind of a pain because then they have to be replaced. And so now again, when you're checking the power steering pump, you simply follow the power steering line that comes off the reservoir and follow that to the pump. It's really easy to see on this truck. So here's a line going into the pump, coming out of the pump, going into the steering box, going back to the reservoir. Okay? So on this truck, the power steering reservoir, power steering pump, the power steering lines, steering box, all real close to each other. And on this truck, here's your steering box, and here's your steering components. Again, everything has to be tight, nothing loose. Everything appears to be secure. Okay. The next thing you need to point out to the examiner is the water pump. Now, pretty simple to... Any questions with that?
Yeah, the power steering pump, is it belt driven? Or?
No. And that's a really good and important thing to understand. The power steering, is it belt driven? Okay?
That one that looked like it was on that video.
On an older truck it might be. That's possible. None of our test trucks have belt driven power steering pumps. None of the test trucks are belt driven power steering. None of the test trucks are belt driven air compressors. So on all the test trucks, power steering and air compressor is not belt driven, driven by the motor directly, gear or chain, internally. You can't see how it's driven. So that's why I can't even tell you how it's driven. But because it's internal, can't see it. So that means the two things are belt driven, and that it would be what? Water pump, alternator. You have to know that stuff. And then what do you explain to them about the belts?
No more than 3/4 inch play after looking for breaks, sprays, tears, damage to belts.
And not missing. I mean, have you ever done that? Where's my belt? It was here this morning. So that's conceivable that the belt is missing completely. Okay? So that's a good question. See, I don't know. Go back and look at the video. I don't know which truck I was using there. That's an old version. That's why I was showing it, just for variety's sake. Okay, so there are going to be doors on the back of the trailer. Anybody that's doing Class B, there's going to be doors in the back of the truck. Some of our doors are swing doors. Some of the doors are roll-up doors. And what we do is we seal them. I take an actual seal and I seal the door so that you don't have to open it for the examiner. So you point at the door and you go, there's the latch, it's sealed, so I'm not allowed to open it. I check to make sure the hinges are secure, the latch is secure, everything seems to be structurally intact, right? And sealed trailers is a very, very common part of our industry. So there's nothing abnormal about you having a sealed trailer. It's probably more common than not, right? So I got no problem doing that. Remember when you're talking about the brakes, all of our brakes are drum brakes, none of them are rotor disc brakes, so forget that part. Okay?
Is it possible you talking about like this brake?
You talking about the what?
How do we inspect in the real world?
In the real world? Okay. Sure. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can get rid of what I just did here. Oh, that's what I did. I lost part of my screen here. With the front brakes, the way you're going to check the front brakes, first of all, you're going to point out the get over to the front here. You're going to point out the brake hose. A line would be hydraulic. You don't have hydraulic lines. That's why we have hoses, okay? So you're going to point out the hose. Get over here so I'm on camera. I don't know if anybody's watching or not. So here's your air hose. You're going to point to the hose, tell them you're checking to make sure the couplings are securely attached. Make sure the hose is not cracked, damaged, worn, and not leaking. Then the air brake chamber. Pardon?
What about splices?
You don't have to worry about that with an air hose. Nobody does that, so they don't view it as something you need to check for. The splices come with electrical stuff. Brake chamber, it mounts to a bracket, so make sure it's securely attached. The clamp is tight that holds it together, so that those nuts and bolts are securely attached, not missing. The chamber itself is not cracked, bent, or damaged, and the chamber is not leaking any air. Then you have the push rod and the slack adjuster. The push rod attaches to a bracket with a pin, and so you're supposed to tell them look for loose or missing parts, and those are the potential loose or missing parts. Be these pins that hold this stuff together. And then you're going to tell them pull by hand, can't move more than an inch.
So the push rod is this long?
This thing right here is the push rod,
okay.
and this is the slack adjuster. Okay.
Yeah, I was looking for. I thought push rod is something like spongy or.
No.
Rubber.
And this is, this one is when you buy one of these from the dealership, this thing is longer than it needs to be so that you can adapt it to whatever truck you're putting it on. So once a mechanic figures out how much of this he needs, he'll cut off the end of it. Okay. So you won't have this length. You only see a little bit of this push rod, about that much of it, right in here. Okay. In fact, I should do that just for demonstration purposes. I should cut this down because it's so darn long. So when the front brake, you're going to pull on it by hand, and this can't move more than an inch. All right? When you pull on it. Now the rear brakes, that's not practical. You could say that to the examiner when you take your test. You could say to the examiner, when talking about the rear brakes or the trailer brakes, you could say, All right, there's the slack adjuster and push rod. Look for loose or missing parts. Pull by hand, can't move more than an inch. But when you're talking about the rear brakes, you have to add something to that. What do you have to add to it?
You have to chock the wheels and release the brakes.
Exactly, chock the wheels and release the parking brake. Because when the parking brake's on, you can't pull on it because it's extended. So to pull on it, you're going to draw it back. That's releasing the brake. If you're going to release your parking brakes and crawl underneath it, it might be advantageous to chock the wheels as opposed to getting run over. Now, if you want to say that during your test, that's fine. I got no problem with that. However, that's not a practical way of doing this. The practical way to check your brakes for proper adjustment is to look at the angle of the slack adjuster to the push rod to see if the brakes are adjusted properly. Now, the angle I'm showing you here is the angle that you would see when the brakes are released. When the brakes are on, it should stop at 90 degrees. Absolute 90 degrees. If it looks like that, it's out of adjustment. So you can use this method in the real world, which is what I would recommend you do, and you can use this on your road test. So what you do with the examiner is, all right, you see that's my push rod and slack adjuster down there. I want to make sure there's no loose or missing parts, and then with the brake on, I want to make sure they're at 90 degrees, and I'd take my hands and do this. And I'd say, if it looked like that, it'd be no good, sir. So I want it to be like this with the brake on. And that's acceptable. Got it? And keep in mind, this method of checking the brakes is applicable to any of these vehicles with the S-cam brake. So the reason that this works is that, look, this S-cam can only go 90 degrees. If it goes more than 90 degrees, what happens to the brake lining? It drops off the end of the S-cam and comes down. And mechanics, if the brakes are out of adjustment enough, it goes too far, and the lining drops down on the other side there, and mechanics call this cammed over. Now your brakes are in a release position, and you can't even apply them now.
Morning, Bill.
Morning.
Is Julius in here?
He was out front in the lobby there.
He was.
Yeah, he was waiting for you. Yep. So I don't know where he went. He was there a few minutes ago. Okay, so does that answer your question about how to check the brakes for proper adjustment? And then the brake linings, remember the brake lining has to be how thick? Quarter inch minimum. No cracks in the drummer lining, no grease or oil on the drummer lining. Okay? All right? Okay. So let's see, let's go down our list here. I just want to point out things that we don't have. You know what we need to talk about? We need to talk about this right here. Spacers or bud spacing. Anybody know what we're talking about there?
Be like a washer between the two wheels.
So, let me...
Or
it's in this one. Get this slide to open up here so I can show you the difference here between these two things. Nobody's been texting me any questions. I see lots of prompts from CNN, but the wheels that have spacers between them is an old wheel that we frequently call Dayton wheels that require a spacer. The newer wheel we refer to as bud wheels. So there is a bud wheel, okay? The bud wheels have an offset and are self-spacing. This older spoked type wheel has a spacer between it because it has no center section. So if we go to our friendly YouTube images here, we go to bud wheels. See, and they call them bud wheels because the bud wheels were first made by this type of wheel with the offset was first made by the Bud manufacturing company. So the bud wheel has an offset to it. Now there's the inner wheel. When you have bud wheels, the inside wheel goes on like so, then the outside wheel goes on in reverse like so. And so the two wheels are flipped. These two wheels are flipped so that they are creating the offset. This older Dayton type wheel here does not have a center section. So when you put that type of wheel on there, you've got to put spacers in between them. Let's see if we can find a picture here. Well, that's not what I'm looking for. So all of these wheels that I'm seeing here are the bud wheels that have the center sections. And see, here's the type of hub that you put the Dayton wheel on. It goes over that splined hub, and you put spacers between the wheels then. Someplace here I gotta find a, you can see it pretty well there. See the spacers between the two wheels? Well, let's go up here and see if we can find a Dayton wheel. So see how that wheel has no center section to it? Here's one. There's no center section to it. So it goes over that spline, that hub there. You put spacers between them, and then you use these lug nuts with these clips at the end to hold it in there. So that's a big difference from your Bud type wheel that has the center sections and the spacers. Okay? So there's the old Dayton type wheel, and there's the Bud type wheel.
You're talking about like a spacer back there behind those rooms?
Well, right. Well,
Or you,
see, these are Bud wheels, so these are self-spacing. There's a spacer that would go between the Dayton wheels. Okay? Now here's the good news. On all of our trucks and trailers that we use for testing, we have strictly Bud wheels that are self-spacing. So when you get to that on the checklist, that's all you need to say is, I have Bud wheels that are self-spacing. Because the Bud wheels have the center sections offset that are flipped and thus create the spacing between the two wheels. Make sense? All right. So going down our list here, drive shafts, some trucks you can see it pretty easily, some trucks you can't. What is it that you check on a drive shaft? Okay, the debris would be in the U-joints at either end.
The shaft isn't cracked or bent?
Not bent is the big thing. Okay? So I'd say the two major things are no debris in the U-joints and not bent. Throw in cracked. Exhaust system. What's the most important thing about your exhaust system?
It's not secure, it's not leaking, looking for
The important thing is you're not leaking fumes into that cab. That'll literally kill you. Okay. Frame, you're looking to make sure that the frame is not structurally unsound. So you're looking for cracks, some sort of structural problem. The longitudinal frame members are the ones that go this way. Then you got your cross members. Cross members are bolted in. So you'll be able to see cross members and the bolts. Just tell them the bolts are secure, not loose, not missing. I've never seen a truck or trailer where the cross members were coming apart, but point it out.
Can they be welded?
No welds.
Well,
On the cross members?
Yeah. The trucks we have are all going to be bolted,
Yeah.
so you don't have to worry about any welding. Tires. What do you have to tell them about the tires on the rear of the truck?
230 seconds.
230 seconds.
They're worn evenly.
Worn evenly.
No tread separation.
Not touching.
No cracks.
They can be retreaded.
They can be they can be retreaded on the front too.
No, there's no retreads on the front.
Okay. You are allowed to have retreaded tires in the front of a truck. You're not allowed to have retreaded tires on the front of a bus. Now, if you've got an old manual, the manual used to say you can't have retreads on the front of anything, but that was wrong. And they corrected it here a couple years back. So if you've read a manual in the past, it may very well have said that. Now, none of us that especially run on any highway speeds will run retreaded tires up front. That's not very smart. Safe thing to do is run virgin tires, brand new tires up front. But it is allowed to run retreadeds on the front as long as it's not a bus. Okay? So back to the rear tires. So the difference is 230 seconds of tread depth. What's similar to the front is check to make sure the tread's not worn unevenly or damaged. Check the sidewall, make sure it's not damaged, cut. Check inflation pressure. That's done with a gauge. Pressure is listed on the sidewall. Valve stem, not leaking, cap in place. So the differences are 230 seconds tread depth, and then two more things. One of them being
The wheelies can't be
the
touching.
two tires can't be touching, and look in between for debris. What debris could be wedged in between your two wheels, two tires? Rocks, okay? And if the rock comes flying out at highway speeds, it becomes a projectile that could be very dangerous. So that's why you check that. So rims, same as the front. Lug nuts, same as the front. Hub oil seal, same as the front. Spacers or bud spacing. Rear suspension, spring, shocks, and airbags. You might not have airbags. You might not even have shocks. There are rear suspension on the trucks and trailer suspensions that don't have shocks. Some do, some don't. The one consistency I can tell you about is they all are hydraulic shocks. None of them are air shocks. There's an examiner out there that's been asking people in the past, you got air shocks or hydraulic shocks? Look them right in the eye. Dude, they don't put air shocks on these big trucks. Why are you even asking me that? And what really upsets me about him asking that question, it isn't in the manual. If it's not in the manual, don't be asking me the question. Because now you're not following the rules. The rules say it has to be in the manual to be on the test. So if an examiner's not following the rules, how? No, that's not acceptable. Okay. Brake hose, brake chamber, slack adjuster, drum and lining. Again, doors will always be there. No lift gates in the back of the trailers. Any B drivers in the room here? Because we do have lift gates on the back of the B trucks. So trailers, basically the same thing as the back of the truck. Header board or bulkhead. So that's the front of the trailer. And what you're looking for, just make sure it's structurally sound. No dents, protrusions. Anything that would hold it together should be secure. Okay. Landing gear. You're checking the landing gear for what?
Raised.
Fully raised, in the full up position. What else?
Handle is
No cracks, no dents.
handle is secure, and all the cross members are not damaged, bent, cracked, nuts and bolts are tight, nothing's loose or missing. Frame, again, no cracks, cross members securely attached, no tandem release. No tandem release on any of our trailers. On the side of the trailer, one or two of the trailers do have doors. None of them have ties or lifts. Everything about the trailer wheels is the same as the rear wheels. Everything about the trailer suspension, same as the rear of the truck suspension. Everything on the brakes, same as the rear of the truck brakes. And then rear of the trailer, none of the tractors have lifts. They all have doors. Okay. All right. Safety belt. Remember, don't tell the examiner to put his safety belt on. Let them figure that out all by themselves. Okay. So you just worry about yours. What did you say about the belt?
No wrap.
Right. No rips, tears, frays. Securely mounted and latches properly. Emergency equipment. 3 pieces of emergency equipment. Okay. So triangles, fire extinguisher, securely mounted, fully charged, and spare fuses. Safe start, neutral, brake set, foot on the brake, clutch in with a manual, neutral, hit the starter. Temperature gauge. Now the thing about the temperature gauge and the oil pressure gauge, you want to tell them that it's functioning. So you look at it and you say, okay, well, it's off the 0 peg, so it looks like it's working. And the important thing here, sir, is the little red light is not on. If the little red light was on, the temperature would be too hot. Okay? Same thing with the oil pressure. Well, the oil pressure gauge appears to be working because it's not at 0. And the important thing here, sir, is the little red light's on, not on. So I know that my oil pressure is okay. Got that? Ammeter or voltmeter gauge. So it's going to be a digital display. It'll have a number. What number are you looking for? Something over 12. So if it's 12 plus, most of them will be in the 13s, maybe low 14s, but typically in the 13 point something, okay? So as long as you're above 12. What's bad is less than 12. If you're 11.8, what that means, you got a 12 volt system. So 11.8 means you're losing more electricity than you're gaining. Thus you are depleting the charge in your battery, and your battery's going to poop out on you, okay? So it has to be in excess of 12. As long as it's in excess of 12.0, then you're good to go. Air gauges, you're going to have 2 air gauges. Some trucks will have 1 gauge with 2 needles, but you always got 2 gauges or 2 needles. You look at the air gauge, tell the examiner what your gauge is indicating, and tell them that you're going to come back and use that in a minute, but at least it's working because it's not at 0. Lighting indicators. Now you got to turn on left signal, right signal, 4-way flashers, and high beams. And when the dash lights come on to indicate that, point out that dash light is working. Left signal, right signal, and 4-way flashers. That's 3 different things. You can't get by just doing the 4-ways. You got to do all three of them. And then the high beams. So if you're going to get the high beam indicator to come on, with some trucks you're going to have to turn the lights on. Okay. Leaving the lights on during the test is probably a smart thing to do. Some of our trucks have daytime running lights, not all of them. So if you want to leave the lights on during the test, that's fine by me. That's a good safety thing to do. Oops. Then horn, and notice in parentheses the letter S. Now you only need 1 horn. And this is one of my pet peeves with these guys. They sometimes make people honk the air horn. I finally bitched at them on an official level, and they finally issued a memo that says you don't have to honk both horns. Okay? Now, the reason I prefer people not honk the air horn twofold, you might scare somebody because those things are so dang loud. And then the other thing is, in the wintertime when it's cold enough, they'll freeze open. They will freeze open, okay? When I was a dispatcher for Penske Logistics, one of my guys going to Fargo gets a hold of me and tells me he's got an air leak, and it took a while for him to divulge. But what happened is he's going down the freeway, somebody came down a ramp and he didn't like it, honked his horn at him. Well, it's 10 below zero, he's going 62 miles an hour, well, the air horn froze open. So now it's, okay? So he calls me up and we're trying to figure out how to solve this. And I says, have you done anything to try to stop the air leak? And what I was thinking about is I always carry a needle nose vice grips with me when I travel, and that's perfect for pinching off a small airline like that. Your airline is just a little plastic tube for the air horn, okay? And so you pinch it off with a needle nose, be perfect. And so I asked him, have you done anything to try to pinch off the line? And he says, well, I climbed up on top of the cab and stuck my socks in the horn, but that didn't do any good. 10 below zero, he's stuffing socks in an air horn, okay? That would be a picture. Anyway, so that's why I'm a little persnickety about the air horn thing. Just honk the electric horn. That's all you got to do. Heater defroster. You have to turn it on. Turn up the heat. Put it in the defrost mode. Put your hand up on the dashboard and tell them, yep, I feel heat coming up on the windshield. And then put your hand down below, turn it on the vent for your feet. Yep, I feel heat down here on the floor. So you have to do both of those things. Okay? So this is a demonstrative process here. Okay? So again, hand up here for the defroster, hand down here for the heater on your floor. Windshield and mirrors. So what you're going to do is you're going to tell the examiner, yep, my windshield is clear of any obstructions, no illegal stickers, it's clean, not cracked. My mirrors, adjusted properly for me, yep, and clean. Now remember, on the outside of the vehicle, when you're talking about mirrors, you tell them the brackets are securely attached, nothing's loose or missing, and the glass is not cracked, broken, or damaged. So you talk about that on the outside. When you're on the inside, talk about proper adjustment and clean. Wipers and washers is next. So actually hit the switch, put the wipers on, hit the washers, squirt the squirty up on the windshield. Tell them, yep, the wipers and washers are working. The wiper isn't leaving any streaks. All right, then you go to the parking brake. So parking brake is on at this point, truck is running at this point. All you're going to do is put it in gear and make a weak attempt at pulling forward, please. Just a little bit of a tug, okay? So if you're in an automatic, just give the gas a little bit of, give the throttle a little bit of throttle in drive. If you're doing a manual, clutch in, put it in first gear, release the clutch just a little, just so you can feel it kind of move. That'll suffice.
So for the parking brake check, am I supposed to release one?
No, leave the parking brake on.
Both of them.
Yeah, because you're proving that the parking brake is working. Okay? Now, for you Class A drivers, this is important. You have to check each of these independently. So you got to push one in, leave one out, attempt to move, and then reverse that. Now, this is the parking brake on your truck, and this is the parking brake on your trailer. The parking brake is on when the button is out. The brake is released when the button is in. Okay? Some people get confused with that.
Say again, sir.
So the parking brake is released when the buttons are pushed in.
Release.
Yep. And the parking brake is on when the buttons are pulled out. Okay?
Okay, when the first time you started for the parking brake, did you release the both or the red one?
You don't release either of them to start with.
Just
And then you release only one.
any one.
Yeah, either one.
Okay.
You should be able to tell them which one you're checking. So if you push this one in and this one's out, which one are you checking?
Trailer. No, the tractor.
The tractor, the truck. This is the trailer. In is released, out is on. So if this one's in, the trailer brake, parking brake is off. Truck brake is still on. And then when you switch them around,
Checking the trailer.
checking the trailer brake. Okay? Trailer parking brake. All right? And it's confusing, right?
Heck confusing.
Yeah. So what you have to do is you have to practice this. You have to practice. Okay? All right. Then you check the service brake. There's no electric assist, so forget that. So when you check the parking brake, you push both buttons in. Pull forward just a little bit and stop the truck.
Now, with that, it should be a substantial roll, correct?
You don't have to go very far or very fast.
Right. But the truck should
You got to move it.
actually roll.
Yep.
Okay.
But not far, not fast.
Right.
Just get it rolling. So if you're doing a manual transmission, I'd let the clutch out, put it right back in.
Ah, I got you.
I wouldn't throttle up with the manual transmission. With an automatic, you'll need to give it just a touch of gas, just to get it moving a little bit. 5 feet, 10 feet is as far as you got to go. 5 to 10 feet. And then stop with a moderate amount of pressure on the brake pedal. Don't put the examiner through the windshield. And after you stopped, you tell the examiner 2 things. What do you tell him?
Stop the wheel.
Service brake, stop the vehicle.
Wheel didn't move to the left or the right,
Stop straight. Didn't pull left or right.
and my brake pedal was firm.
My brake pedal's firm. Now, saying your brake pedal is firm is stupid with an air brake, but say it anyway. And I'll tell you this, guys. Every single truck you drive, those brakes are going to have a different feel to it. Every single one you drive is going to give it a different feel. Okay? But tell the examiner, yep, stop straight, pedals feels firm. Then, this is where you go into the air brake check, and this is what gets confusing. Keep your foot on the brake pedal, turn the truck off, turn the key back to on. If you got a manual transmission, put it in neutral. If you got the automatic, push the neutral button. So put it in neutral. Keep your foot on the brake, shut it off. After you get the motor killed, turn the key back to the on position. Do not take your foot off the brake and do not set the parking brake. And then you go into the air brake process. First thing on the air brake process is what?
1 minute.
1 minute air loss.
Now, when you're doing that 1 minute air loss, and your foot is already on the brake,
Correct?
as soon as you cut that key back on and your gauge is set, can you go ahead and start the timer from there?
Yep.
Okay.
And you have to time this, and the examiner is timing you. The examiner is not timing for you. The examiner is timing you. Okay? So count to 60 in your head, or use a watch if you wear it, or bring a watch. Okay? I would suggest you don't use a cell phone because you're not supposed to be using a cell phone during the test. Then once you're done with the 1 minute air loss, and you have to tell them, okay, the 1 minute's up, I haven't lost more than 4 pounds for a Class A rig combination. All right? For you B drivers, can't lose more than 3. All right, what's the next step in the air brake check?
Gotta get your buzzer, your low air buzzer.
The buzzer to come on. The buzzer comes on by pumping the brake pedal. Has to come on between 60 and 80. Something under 80, but before it gets to 60. When the buzzer comes on, stop pumping and tell the examiner 2 things. Yep, it came on at, and give a number between 60 and 80. So 65, 70, or 75. Say one of those 3 numbers. And I don't care what the gauge says. Just say that. And then tell them, and that's correct because it has to come on between 60 and 80. All right, what's the 3rd step?
Your emergency brakes.
Get the emergency brakes to come on. According to them, that means these buttons have to pop out between 20 and 40. Now, when you're pumping the brake pedal to get this to happen, guys, You gotta pump assertively. If you just go, the buttons will do the same thing.
Okay, if you pump in like fast, sometimes they will come both together.
Yes, and that's preferable.
Okay.
That's the best way to do it. You pump hard and fast, they come together. And if you pump like a little old lady,
The track is
the trailer always pops first.
first.
Yep. But like he said, if you pump aggressively, they'll pop pretty close to each other. Boom. But if you pump like a little old lady, it'll take half a day to get the thing to pop out. Okay?
One is the pump it fast and they come.
Yes. And that's what you want to do. Okay? Pump like a truck driver. All right? Now, I don't care what the gauge says when it pops out. You tell them that it popped out at 25 pounds. Which is good, sir, because it has to pop between 20 and 40. And I'll tell you right now, the gauge might say 15. I don't care what the gauge says. Tell them 25. Now, part of what's going on here, as you are depleting your air pressure, what is the spring doing?
Slowly expanding.
I guarantee you something. Those brakes are locked up before this pops out. I guarantee it. I'll show you. I'll prove it to you if you want. But the examiners don't know that. The examiners think that this is some sort of on and off switch. And the brakes don't come on until they pop out. Yes, they do. This isn't something that any of us checks on a daily basis. I don't check to see if these things pop out. If you take air pressure away from the spring, what's the spring going to do? And when you checked your parking brake a minute ago, you were checking these, weren't you? And they worked, didn't they? This is a stupid exercise, but we're going to do it anyway because they want us to do it. And if these don't pop out until 15 pounds, who cares? The brakes are on already before that. So just tell them what they want to hear. Just humor them, play their game. And then you got to check your emergency brake. So you start the truck up and try to move with this thing on, and these things popped out. Haven't you already done that?
Right.
Not according to them. According to them, nope, you haven't checked your emergency brake yet. See, they don't understand it's the same dang thing. These people are clueless.
So I'll do my emergency brake twice. The first time a vacuum brake check, and
Right.
and second time air brake,
Emergency brake.
emergency brake.
So they call it two different things, even though it's the same thing.
Yeah, that's-
Because they don't know any better. They didn't go to Interstate truck driving school. I wish they would. Pretty frustrating, right?
Okay, when you finish it, the bumping, they come like 40 to 20,
Yep.
and after that you can the engine make it on, right?
Yep, and start the truck and try to move again to prove the emergency brake works. Okay?
So do they think that there's two different systems down there?
Yeah.
Or something?
And that's what the manual says. The manual says you have 3 different braking systems.
Really?
Yeah, that's what the manual says. Service brake, parking brake, and emergency brake. So they think that that is a completely separate system somehow. But, because they don't know. All they know is what it says in the manual. The manual says you got 3 of them. Manual's wrong. I mean, there's so much about this that makes no sense, and about the way way you're being tested. Okay, we're talking about the air brake check, right? So, to check for air loss, they want the motor off. Do you have to have your engine off to know if you've got an air leak?
No.
No. If you've got an air leak, you will see it with the motor running. Why? Because the compressor kicks off when you get to 125. So if you've got an air leak, compressor takes you to 125, kicks off. If there's a leak, it'll go down. You do not need the motor running to see if you got an air leak. But by golly, you got to do it that way on their test. If you don't do it their way, you fail. The buzzer. Do you need the motor off for the buzzer to work?
No.
No, in fact, you want it to work with the motor on, for crying out loud, when you're driving down the stupid road. But you check that buzzer with the motor running.
Nope, you're not doing it the right way. You failed the test.
Same thing with the spring brakes. Do you need the motor off in order for the spring brakes to set? No!
But you gotta do it their way.
It's so frustrating dealing with such incompetence. I know how these things work. You now know how they work better than the examiner does. And yet you still got to do the dance. Jump through the hoops. Okay? You know, in Wisconsin, Cody, the examiners over there actually understand these systems, but they're still required to make you do the dance. So they know the difference between the emergency brake and the parking brake is the same dang thing. But they still are required by the state of Wisconsin to conduct the test that way. And the reason for that is because the way the manual's set up, and the manual is written by an organization called the American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators down in Kansas City. So if the people down in Kansas City would get their act together and the people at the states would get the act together, this would be a more practical, real-world deal. But that ain't gonna happen. All right, so we gotta march to the tune of their drum. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Simple as that. All right. Okay. Any questions about our checklist here?
So when do you check the?
Okay. Well, so what Matt's asking about is before you pull away from the curb, you have to test your trailer connection. Now we call that what? We frequently call it trailer tug. Don't use those words with the examiner. Gets you no credit. You got to tell the examiner, I'm checking my trailer connection. So when the examiner says, okay, when it's safe, go ahead and pull out, let's start. You release your brakes, put it in gear, and then you can apply the trailer brake one of two ways. You can leave the red button pulled out or use the lever on the dashboard to set the brakes on. Yep. Shuttle valve, trolley valve. Now, Cody in Wisconsin, they don't want it done that way. He wants it done with this. Okay. So remember to do your trailer tug, checking trailer connection before you pull away from the curb. Thanks for reminding me of that.
So now if you don't do that,
You lose points. Yep. And you're losing points on the driving side of it, not on the pre-trip inspection. Because that's after the pre-trip inspection that you're supposed to
after
do.
the air brake check, you're done with the pre-trip inspection, right?
Yep. Exactly. So it is scored as a part of the road test.
But you're gonna wanna get used to doing that anyway, no matter what.
Exactly.
So if you fail your first part, you have to do you have to come back later and do the driving part. You still have to do your tug.
Yeah. So if you had passed your inspection, when you come back to take the test again, you get to skip the inspection if you've passed it. They will check the lights and make sure there's no air leaks, so they're checking a truck, not you. But here again, when the examiner says, okay, go ahead and pull out, yep, you got to check your trailer connection. Okay? And they won't remind you, they won't tell you, it's not written down any place but in the manual. It's in the manual, and that's why it's fair game. And that's one little sentence. One time in the manual. But it's in there, so then it's fair game. All right? Any questions? All right, so here's what we got going for the rest of the day. Mark has pulled a truck down for you guys to go walk around if you want to do that. We also have the truck right outside the back door that you can practice the ABBC. Mark's running around with a high-vis jacket on. You can ask him questions. He can help you in the truck with the ABBC. Make sense? I'll throw a video on here at about noon that talks about the driving part of it if you want to watch that. Okay? The snow is supposed to get heavier as we go on today, so do the smart thing in terms of when you head out of here to make sure you're safe. And then everything looks good for Monday, so we'll be back here Monday morning at 8 o'clock.
What's the weather supposed to do tomorrow?
About the same.
Really?
Well, it's not going to be heavy, though. The snow is supposed to taper off. Okay? So with that, I'm going to close my video. Have a good day, drivers. More important, have a safe day.